The basic assumptions that undergird reading instruction are basically that, not that it's 100% natural, because like if you look at some of this, it's not like people don't think that there's no role for a teacher. We could just send kids out into the woods and they'd learn on their own. No, there's definitely a role for a teacher, but it's really to be sort of more of a guide. One of the most popular ways to teach reading in this country is through something that's known as guided reading. You could get a whole bunch of different definitions from that from different people, but the basic idea is that when kids come to school, you want to create an environment in which they can learn to read, in which learning to read will happen. So you guide them, you read with them, you find books that are at their level and you get them to read them and you have them move up. And you'll see all over American schools, guided reading, leveled reading, reading along with, conferring with kids, reading along with kids. This is really big. And what you'll also see in a lot of reading instruction is sort of remnants of this idea that when readers come across a word they don't know, they don't necessarily have to look at all the words and sound it out and use any kind of phonics skills. They can kind of guess and use context, and that might actually be a more sophisticated way of doing it. That when you come across a word you don't know, what you want to do is sort of draw on all of your resources, everything you already know, what you've been comprehending so far, to figure out what the word is. But that's teaching kids that reading is sort of like this series of strategic actions, this kind of guessing game, rather than this actually very much of a precision sport. Reading is actually very precise. What the reading research shows us is that skilled readers very, very quickly look at every single letter in a word. They are processing those words very, very fast, and like I said before, freeing up mental space to focus on the meaning of what they're reading, which is the goal. We want all kids to get there. But we're sort of putting like the cart before the horse in a lot of reading instruction. And in the idea that we don't want to lose the end game, and we don't want to lose sight of the fact that the point is for kids to understand what they read and enjoy reading. 100% that's the point. But the question is, what do you need to do to make sure kids get there? Part of the problem, of course, is that we are talking about this in the United States of America, where we speak English. So English is actually a fairly difficult language. If you look at the alphabetic languages in the world, English is probably one of the most complex, which means that even a typically developing reader who doesn't have a particularly hard time learning how to read, it's going to take that kid 2 or 3 years with some good instruction, some good practice, to be able to become a good reader. So a typically developing reader in learning English is probably going to be in 2nd grade before they've got like a pretty good grasp of the language to be able to do what's an essential thing in reading. And this is what the reading researchers showed, which is teach themselves. Because you do learn to read by reading once you kind of have like the basics of what's up with the written language. But it takes a while to learn English, which is one of the reasons why we fight about it in this country, because it actually takes a lot to learn English, and it means it takes a lot to teach English. So like kids in Italy, so Italian is a very orthographically shallow language, which means that Italian is spelled the way it sounds. So you can teach kids who speak Italian very well, you can teach them to read it, typically developing kids who don't have a problem with sort of phonological processing, right? But most kids don't have a big problem with that, right? So if you have a typically developing kid, you can teach that kid how to read written Italian in a few months, typically. But again, it's going to take a few years in English.